Well, there's obviously a lot of similarity, I think, between the language of religion and the language of art and poetry. Obviously, a lot of people think the Bible can be read as a work of literature, and people who are not religious, I think, can get quite a lot out of it, and much of the language is very beautiful. So there are similarities. I've also argued in my book, A Confusion of the Spheres, that it's helpful to think about how we come to understand particular metaphors in literature, or how we come to understand certain facets of musical works, for example, when we're thinking about religion. Because one of the problems, I think, in the classical debates between realism and anti-realism tend to be that you simply take words and sentences outside of their context, and you just assume everyone can understand these concepts regardless of whether they've had any training or not. So, usually, people who are committed to a sort of classical form of realism tend to ask you, well, do you believe that the proposition God exists is true or not? And, that's supposed to be the test of A, whether you're a realist, and obviously B, whether you're religious. I don't think it's as simple as that. In order to be able to answer that question, you first of all have to have the concept of God. And of course, we all sort of loosely know what God means if we've been brought up in a certain way, and you have a superficial understanding of what that means. But that's not necessarily to say that you've got a fully fledged understanding where you're aware of the grammatical differences between the concept of God and other concepts. And I think the same is true in poetry and music. That's why at school, if you're lucky at any rate, you might have poetry appreciation classes and so on. Sometimes it's not easy to understand a metaphor. You have to understand what the similarities are that the author is trying to draw your attention to, and so on. So in those respects, I think that there is a similarity in coming to learn what artistic language means and religious language. But there is, of course, a crucial difference. At least for the religious believer, religious language is about a deeper reality. Whereas, well, I mean, maybe I should qualify that. In some ways, of course, literature is about a deeper reality as well, but perhaps more about a deeper reality about us, whereas religious believers obviously think that religious language tells us something about things beyond us as well. They're not just about the human world, they're also telling us something about the divine. So in that respect, I think there is a crucial difference, but nevertheless, I think religious language uses many of the same sorts of devices that artistic language employs, metaphor, simile, and so on. And so I think it's helpful to think about the connections between the two, because I think you get to a deeper understanding of how religious language works if you have more appreciation for artistic language use. But that's not to say, that they're completely similar, because I don't think, even if you're persuaded by the Wittgensteinian view, you'd want to deny that religious language is about a divine reality, at least if you believe that there is such a thing.